The fourth book, the first part, How We Make a Decision. By John Lehrer. Introduction. Imagine that you are a pilot of a transport plane and are currently flying over the city. Suddenly, an engine exploded in the plane and it lost control. You have two choices, to make a sharp descent or to direct the plane to the sky. In one case, this will give a chance to avoid stopping the engine and return the aircraft to the desired course. In the other, the wings of the aircraft will not cope with the load, since in stressful and normal situations the brain makes a decision. Since ancient times, all hypotheses have been reduced to one thing: people are rational. When we make a decision, it is assumed that we consciously analyze all possible options and carefully weigh the pros and cons. But this is not the case. It turns out that by nature we are not rational at all. Our brain consists of different areas, many of which are responsible for emotions. Whenever a person makes a decision, his brain is overwhelmed by feelings. Even when a person tries to be prudent and restrained, emotional impulses influence his decisions. To make the right decisions, we need both sides of our consciousness. We can either rely on static data or trust our own intuition. According to William James, an American psychologist, our mind consists of two different thought systems, one of which is rational and conscious, and the second is fast, emotionally, effortless. James argued that the key to decision-making is to understand when to rely on which system. Chapter 1. The quarterback is in your pocket. In 1982, a patient named Elliot had a small tumor removed from the cerebral cortex. After the operation, he had one psychological flaw: he was unable to make decisions. Routine tasks that should have taken 10 minutes now required several hours. Elliot endlessly pondered over minor details, whether to use a blue pen or a black one, which radio station to turn on, where to park the car, and so on. Friends and family noticed that after the operation he seemed completely devoid of emotions, completely insensitive to everything around him. To confirm this diagnosis, Elliot's neurologist connected him to a device that measures the activity of sweat glands on the palms. When a person experiences strong emotions, the palms begin to sweat. The lie detector works just on the basis of this principle. He found that no matter what questions he asked, no matter what horrifying pictures he showed, Elliot's palms remained dry. He did not experience any emotions. According to the neurologist, Elliot's pathology showed that emotions are a key element of the decision-making process. When all our senses are cut off, the most banal solution becomes impossible. A brain that feels nothing cannot decide on anything. One of the emotionless patients was assigned a date for the next appointment. He was given a choice of two dates, both next month with a difference of only a few days. The patient took out his diary and started checking the calendar. For a good 15 minutes he listed the reasons for and against each of the two dates: previous arrangements, proximity to other meetings, possible meteorological conditions, almost everything you can think about with regard to a simple date. Doctors have witnessed how the patient endlessly makes a plan and unsuccessfully compares various options and their possible consequences. At the same time, the player on the field, having received the ball, in fact, must process a large number of different options for action. He needs to either make a groove, or drive the ball himself, or hit the goal and the like. At a fast pace, when there is no time to think, a person cannot say how he chose this or that decision, as if his brain makes it by itself. The main part of the brain responsible for the production of emotions is a small rounded area called the orbit of the frontal cortex and located directly behind the eyes, in the lower part of the frontal lobe. It is the orbit of the frontal cortex that is responsible for the inclusion of visceral emotions in the decision-making process. When the neural connection is disrupted, the orbit of the frontal cortex cannot perceive our emotions, and we lose access to the array of judgments that we usually rely on. Suddenly we are unable to make a spontaneous choice. Chapter 2. Prediction of dopamine. The value of dopamine was discovered by chance. In 1954, two neuroscientists decided to implant an electrode in the very center of the rat's brain. They drove the needle right next to the nucleus accumbens, the part of the brain that produces pleasant emotions. But scientists quickly discovered that too much pleasure can be fatal. They placed electrodes in the brains of several rodents, and then sent a weak current through each wire, thus bringing the nucleus accumbens into a state of constant excitation. Scientists noticed that the rats lost interest in everything, they just cowered in the corners of their cages, frozen with happiness. In a few days, all the animals died of thirst. Neuroscientists have learned that rats have suffered from an excess of dopamine. Stimulation of the nucleus accumbens caused a large surge of neurotransmitter, which caused the rats to fall into ecstasy. Drugs act on people in a similar way. In another experiment, a medical student played a loud sound, waited a couple of seconds, and then poured a few drops of apple juice into the monkey's mouth. At first, dopamine neurons were excited only at the moment when juice got into the monkey's mouth. The cells reacted to the reward itself. However, as soon as the animal realized that the sound precedes the appearance of juice, the same neurons began to be excited when the sound appeared. Now they were more concerned with predicting the appearance of a reward, rather than receiving it themselves. This chain can be extended. For example, play a sound, turn on the light, give juice, and so on. From the minute the monkey gets used to waiting for juice after a certain sequence of events, its dopamine cells closely monitor the development of the situation. If everything goes according to plan, dopamine neurons provide a short burst of pleasure. The monkey is happy. But if the monkey does not receive the promised juice, the dopamine cells send a signal informing about the error and stops giving dopamine. When the brain encounters something unexpected, for example, a monkey does not receive juice after a sound, the cerebral cortex immediately pays attention to it. Brain cells are absorbed by strong emotions. Nothing can make the brain focus like surprise. This rapid cellular process begins in a tiny area in the very center of the brain, rich in dopamine neurons. This area is called the anterior lumbar cortex. It is involved in determining errors. When dopamine neurons make an erroneous prediction, the brain generates a special electrical signal known as error-related negativity. Having not received the juice after the sound, the anterior lumbar cortex makes appropriate adjustments to future predictions. Now the monkey will be ready for the fact that it may not get the juice after the sound. This is a key aspect of decision-making. If we cannot use past lessons and past mistakes for future decisions, we will have to repeat our own mistakes endlessly. The complete destruction of the dopamine system, in which neurons are unable to correct their expectations based on reality, can lead to a mental illness such as schizophrenia. Chapter 3: Deceptive Feelings. Sometimes dopamine neurons trick your senses. The thing is that their task is to predict events in the future. They always want to know what it is. A loud sound or a flash of light precedes the reward. Your neurons are trying to decipher the patterns embedded in the game. They want to understand the game, decode the logic of luck, find the circumstances predicting a big win. To do this, we conducted several experiments. For example, there is a maze in the corners of which pieces of food were placed. In 60% of cases, food was placed on the left side. How did the rat react to this? She quickly realized that the left side was more advantageous. As a result, she always went to the left side of the maze, so that the percentage of successful attempts was equal to 60%. The rat did not strive for perfection, she just accepted the option that usually gave the best result. The experiment was repeated with students. Unlike rats, students with their complex networks of dopamine neurons stubbornly searched for an elusive connection that determined the location of the reward. They made predictions and then tried to learn from their mistakes. The problem was that there was nothing to predict. Apparently the randomness was real. Since students did not always choose the 60% option, as a result, their percentage of successful attempts was only 52%. Most of the students wanted to discover the underlying algorithm of the experiment, although there was none. As a result, the rat was much more cunning. We trust our feelings and think that we distinguish certain patterns where in reality they do not exist. Instead of seeing randomness, we invent imaginary systems and see meaningful trends where nonsense reigns. The same thing happens on the stock exchange. The shareholder sees that the market is growing sharply in price and begins to invest money there. While the player is enjoying his profit, his dopamine neurons tell him, if you had invested not $100, but $1,000, you would have received several times more. After that, the player feels a sense of regret and begins to increase his investments. When the market starts to keep growing, it pushes people to make bigger and bigger investments. And the Hulk brain is convinced that he has discovered the secret mechanism of the stock exchange, so he does not think about the possibility of losses. And then the soap bubble bursts. When the market starts to fall, the effect is exactly the opposite. People can't wait to get out of what they got into, because their brain just doesn't want to regret it anymore. At this moment, the brain realizes that it has made very costly prediction errors and the investor seeks to get rid of assets whose value is decreasing as soon as possible. Hence the financial panic. The conclusion from what has been said is that it is naive to try to beat the market, relying on your brain. Aversion to loss. Aversion to loss is a congenital defect, all experiencing emotions are affected by it. This is part of a larger psychological phenomenon known as the negativity effect, meaning that for a person's consciousness, the bad is stronger than the good. So an experiment was conducted, students were offered to play heads or tails and warned that the penalty for losing would be $20, and for winning the player on average asked for about $40. But in any case, the pain of losing was about twice as strong as the pleasure of winning. It's the same with credit cards. When we buy something for cash, we give money here and now, so we wonder if I need this thing at all. Paying with a credit card actually reduces activity in the insula of the rail, a part of the brain associated with negative feelings. Spending money with a credit card doesn't feel like something unpleasant, so you spend even more. But if you ask them a question, would you buy this thing if you had to go to an ATM, withdraw money from the card and pay for the goods with it? Most say no. As a result, when people focus on long-term goals, such as retirement savings, they are confused by fleeting temptations. Impulsive emotions make us buy things that we cannot afford, for example, a car on credit. In one experiment, a person was asked to choose between a gift certificate, which he could receive immediately, or a slightly larger certificate, which he would have to wait 2 weeks. These two variants activated two completely different neural systems. When the subject thought about getting a gift certificate in the future, brain regions associated with rational planning, such as the prefrontal cortex, were more active. These areas of the bark force a person to be patient and wait a few extra weeks for greater benefits in the future. However, when he started thinking about getting a gift certificate right away, areas of the brain associated with emotions, such as the dopamine system of the midbrain and the nucleus accumbens, became active. It is these cells that advise a person to take out a mortgage that he cannot afford. All these cells want a reward, and immediately. Chapter 4. The Use of Reason. Dodge and several other firefighters arrived in the step to prevent the fire, but the information turned out to be incorrect and the flame turned out to be much larger than expected. Firefighters were trapped on several sides and forced to run away from the fire on the prairie. But the flame was getting close to them and only Dot came up with the idea to set fire to the grass behind him and lie down on the scorched earth. This saved his life. The fire bypassed him, but almost all the rest of his team died. Dodge survived the fire because he was able to put aside his emotions. Instead he turned to his rational intellect, because only he is capable of balanced and creative thinking. So, imagine that you were given $50 and asked to choose one of two options. The first is that with a 40% probability you will save all $50, and with a 60% probability you will lose everything. The second option is more reliable. Choosing it, you will be left with $20 anyway. If you are like most people, you would take guaranteed money. It's always better to get something than to get nothing at all. Now let's play this game again. The risky option has not changed, you can still keep all $50 with a 40% probability. However, the second option has been slightly transformed. This time you are guaranteed to lose $30, instead of getting $20. The result, of course, remained the same. In both cases, you walk away with $20 out of the original $50. However, different descriptions greatly influence people's behavior. When the choice is formulated in terms of winning $20, only 42% of people choose the risky option. But when the same choice is formulated in terms of losing $30, 62% of people decide to take the risk. This human flaw is known as the framing effect. It is a byproduct of loss aversion. Also, twice as many patients decide to have surgery after they are told that they are 80% likely to survive than when they are told that there is a 20% chance that they will die. These two formulations, which are different in form but essentially related, activate different areas of the brain. Neurologists have found that those people who decided to take a risk, those whose decisions were influenced by the prospect of losing $30, were misled by the excited amygdala, an area of the brain that causes negative feelings when excited. When a person thinks about losing something, the amygdala automatically activates. That's why people hate losses so much. However, When scientists looked at the brains of people who were not affected by different formulations, they found that the cerebellar tonsils of these people were also excited. It's all about the prefrontal cortex of the brain. To the surprise of scientists, the decisions of the participants in the experiment were most predetermined by the activity of the frontal cortex, and not the amygdala. When there was more activity in the prefrontal cortex, people could better resist the framing effect. They could ignore their rational feelings and realize that the scriptures are equivalent. Instead of just believing their amygdala, they were doing arithmetic. As a result, they made better gaming decisions. How do we manage our emotions? The answer is surprisingly simple. We manage them by thinking about them. The prefrontal cortex allows each of us to reflect on our own thinking. This ability psychologists call metacognition. We know when we get angry, every emotion includes an element of introspection, giving a person a chance to figure out why he feels what he feels. So the reason Dodge survived wasn't because he wasn't scared like all the other firefighters, he was terrified. Dodge survived because he realized that fear would not save him and he needed to look for another solution. Hi there. If you liked it, and I know you liked it, put a like under this video, subscribe to the channel and leave in the comments the title of the book that you would like to listen to in 30 minutes. Thanks, bye.